superintendent. So if you would, please, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Peter Gorman.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here with all of you today. I am a retired superintendent, and like many superintendents, I retired on a Friday, and on Monday I started my new job. And it was a great opportunity for me. I've worked in a lot of different positions. I've done a lot of the same things that you all have done, started in elementary school and went through middle school, high school, et cetera, and moved into the district office roles. And I don't know if I ever enjoyed a job more than I did as a school principal. I actually felt I could get more done as a school principal than I could any other job I had. And there were two jobs where I felt that I had the keys and I could drive: principal and superintendent. But at the same point in time, victory's in the classroom. That's where it really happens. And the bulk of my career in the district office, we never won the game from the district office. We won it case by case, school by school, and I was lucky enough to work in some great districts where we did some really good work. And along the way in doing those different jobs, I've seen a lot of folks who are trying to do the important work of getting along with their board. One of the things I get to do now is I write a column for Board and Administrator magazine, and I get to work with school boards, and a great portion of my time right now is actually helping superintendents navigate that work with school boards. Because I think 80% of the job is doing the job, and 20% of the job's keeping the job. And the keeping the job part seems to all be around the board piece. So I get to do a lot of work with that right now. But when I think about the 80% of the job, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some lessons I learned. And when I think about it, I have to take a step back, because I have found I'm struggling with the former superintendent's challenges. We sort of mythologize our time when we left it. We forget some of those things. For example, context matters. I'll come and I'll talk to a group like this and I'll say, well, we did, I did, whatever. When someone comes and chats with you, contextually, your situation is incredibly important, and we're all the same. We're unique. We've got those unique challenges we face. So when I come and talk to a group like this, I like to start off by just saying, let's recognize your context is different. I started the morning chatting with a gentleman from Alaska. Very different than what I dealt with in North Carolina, California, or Florida. So context matters. The second piece is we build upon accumulated knowledge, and from that, we hear individuals who come forward and talk to us, and it's as though, thank God you got here as superintendent. Nothing good ever happened till I showed up. And that's just not true. A lot of really good things were happening in these districts for a long time, but you are the right man or woman at that moment to be superintendent, to bring your special talents or skills to the district. So I think we need to make sure we always recognize and acknowledge that we build on that accumulated knowledge. And with that as well, there's a lot of them who were there before you got there, more than you're bringing in with you, regardless of what the situation is. So you've got to be super careful about acknowledging that good work has happened. And then we only tend to remember the positive events. We forget that when you were closing schools in 2008 and 2009 during the terrible financial time, that they picketed your home. We forget the challenges. You forget that at a board meeting, protesters got arrested. Those things we've got to remember in that context and not just walk away and mythologize our time. So I learned a lot of difficult lessons. There was 123 editorial cartoons drawn of me in my career. So every once in a while, I got to go back and look at one of those cartoons just to remind me. American School Board Journal did us the favor in Charlotte right before I got there and cited Charlotte as the most dysfunctional school board in America. Yes, we were number one. And that was the cartoon when I was starting the job. By the way, that was part of when they started to pick which part of my body they were, how in editorial cartoons, they sort of, take one particular feature. Well, they decided it's the nose we're going to go with on this guy. By the time I left, I was Pinocchio practically. And then when we went through the terrible budget cuts were just a tough time, that's what they referred to as our work with budget cuts. That's the only cartoon they ever did that actually hurt me. That one hurt because we were doing so much trying to do things in a humane way to benefit children and our staff. And they compared it to a meat grinder. And that one really hurt me because I thought they were treating our staff poorly through that process. So when I come to you and I talk to a group like this, I just want to keep those things in mind. Now, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something I have seen both in my work and my experiences, and that I see in the work that I do today. So now I do executive coaching for superintendents and their leadership team, ranging from school districts that are top 10 in size in the nation to I work with a school district in Mississippi that has 400 kids. And I'm finding that there are commonalities in every district I work with. And what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is the work of increasing student achievement at scale. And in some cases you think, well, at scale must mean huge districts. I think getting an entire school to increase student achievement is scaling up the work. To do it in more than one classroom or more than a cluster of classrooms, we're talking about increasing student achievement at scale. And part of the reason why I think we've got to be cognizant of that is a challenge we face in America today, that we're really three school districts, or three sets of schools in one. We hear comparisons to PISA and all of those other assessments. If just our white students were assessed, we would be near the top of academic performance based on standardized assessment measures. If we take, though, and we add in our Latino and African American students, that changes. But then when we think about the experience that our black students or Latino students are getting, it is not equivalent to what our white students are getting. So when I talk about increasing student achievement at scale, I'm talking about for all students. How do we move the ranking of the U.S. to the left on that graph? How do we make sure every child is having a great experience? And when I think about that, there's some commonalities that I've seen. How do you do it at scale? Well, the places that I have seen have turned best practice into common practice, and I actually believe it starts in the superintendent's office. As I go to districts, sometimes I go to places and I see, and they're collectors. They're just collecting a bunch of different neat things, innovative things. And the collections really don't have any purpose to them. They're kind of nifty to look at, but there's no alignment there. And when I'm talking about increasing student achievement at scale, I think it goes from the very beliefs that you have all the way through the evaluation system in the district. And the places where I have been that I have seen that do the good work at scale are in alignment in each of these areas. Now, with that, I want to be clear. If you're out of alignment, it doesn't mean you're still not doing a lot of good work. You're doing a lot of good work, but it's not compounding for you. So I like to think of compounding in an aligned system like the concept of compound interest. Think about those dollars you invested very early in your career in your 403B, and think what's happened to those dollars. Think about the fact that there's this story this financial guy talks about, and he talks about two people. One individual invested $2,000 a year from like 18 to 26, and then never invested again, but happened to have great results, got about 12% interest. And then talks about another individual who didn't invest, a good friend of his, never invested until 26, but at 26 until 65, invests $2,000 a year all the way until they're 65 and also gets 12% interest. Who actually has more money? Believe it or not, it's the person who only invested from 18 to 26 because the compound interest. Well, I think when you are in alignment, it's like compounding. It grows and it builds upon each other. And when a superintendent is doing that great work and it's compounding that work, that's when you with your colleague, 1 and 1 equals the work of 3 people, or 1 and 1 can equal the work of 4 people. It gets more powerful and more powerful. Now, in these cases where it's not completely aligned, they're still working on good things. They just don't get that benefit. And here's a video we're going to show you briefly that I think exemplifies what happens when you're out of alignment. Now, he's still doing good work. That car needed to be cleaned off, but it's the wrong car. And that's the type of thing that I'm seeing happening in too many districts that are out there. And I like to use the analogy of what trip are you on? You see, I've seen districts and visited districts that when I go there, it's as though I can see all of the team members coming in the morning and they park their car, and as they park their car, they reach up on their roof and they pull off a kayak. And they put that kayak under their arm and they walk into work for the day, and they're going to spend the day paddling around on their own. And then I see other districts and other examples where maybe a group of individuals hops out of a van and they pull a whitewater raft off their roof. And they go and they're going to paddle around in small groups. And they're going to deal with some really rough rapids, and they're going to take that on. And then I go visit other districts and I see other examples, and they get to work and they pull out a racing shell. That's the name of the boat that rowers use, Olympic type rowers. And they get in that boat together. And they go far and they go faster because they're rowing in the same direction. And to get that alignment in place, you have to be the one at the front of the boat as superintendent that calls out that cadence, that keeps them stroking in the same direction, that keeps that happening. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have moments when you got to tell an individual, go handle this thing. So when we were in Charlotte, Robert was chief of staff for us there, and I'm sure he felt a lot that I sent him in a kayak, or I told him to get this group of individuals in your whitewater raft. But if you're going to go far, you've got to get everyone moving in that same direction, and you've got to create an aligned system. And I also like to think of it sort of like the spine. If you are out of an alignment with your back, if you need to see a chiropractor or a doctor and get an adjustment, think of back pain if you've ever had it and how it impacts you in everything that you do. Walking, breathing even can hurt. Any movement of the body. So is your district aligned? And when I think of those aligned districts, I think it actually all starts with beliefs. And that may sound overly simplistic, but it's as simple as that to start. And we used to start our interviews talking with folks about what is your belief system? What do you believe? And in developing and refining your belief system, I don't want to just know about your beliefs about kids. That's easy. But I have found, and actually when I say that's easy, actually I've found that not everyone even believes in that. I have found individuals and some teachers that I have worked with who believe that they're the font of knowledge. If kids so choose to come to drink from that font of knowledge, good for them. And if they don't, well, tough luck, I offered that to them. You see, because I believe in going through all of those questions with individuals, it is our responsibility to go to superhuman efforts to help kids, to go so far above and beyond because of what children need. So I started every interview I did trying to drill down on the beliefs of the individual. Did they believe all children can learn? Did they believe that it is a teacher's job to do whatever it takes? Did they believe that it is a principal's job to find the kids, feed the kids, clothe the kids if that's what it took, to take care of all of those things? And as you go through there, I have found the farther down you go, the more variation there is in people's responses. And I'm finding as well that in the farther down you go, I'm finding that the board piece has become more and more politicized. And as that board piece has become more and more politicized, I want to be careful about this because I don't want to just dwell on the good old days. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We can say, well, in the good old days, people ran for school board for the right reasons. People ran for the school board because they wanted to help the entire district, and they were community leaders. And now school board members, quite often, are individuals who've been wronged somewhere in their career with their children. They're single issue people, or it's a stepping stone to something else, or they have a particular political agenda. But I want to be careful I don't mythologize the good old days, because with that I always want to ask, good for who? If you were a white guy, odds were they were pretty good for you. But let's remember, the good old days and even today, that graph I showed you of 3 Americas, it was that way too in the good old days. We just didn't talk about it as much. But it all begins with that belief system, and it takes off from there. And then from the belief system, it moves into the vision, why you exist. And you know, with the vision, why you exist, and the mission, what's your purpose and what are you trying to accomplish, that really gets handed over to the board to set the vision and mission. But you get to exemplify and personify that and what it really looks like in action. And in doing those pieces, putting it in place, that's where I think it is so important that you actually become a true functioning governance team. And in doing that work, that's kind of tricky. Because when I think of you as a governance team member, you have this really unique position you're in. And I think of it along the lines as this. It's like a tennis match. Governance has a little net that goes across it. And you have this really cool ability that you have sort of incredible skills and talents that you're able to jump over the net. You have the ability to jump over the net and move into the governance side with the board. But you're also super strong that you have the ability sometimes to carry members of your team over that net with you. And you have the ability that you sometimes bring members of the board on their side of the net, you pick them up and carry them across the net into the operations side sometimes. But you know what happens? Board members are slippery. And sometimes you lose your grip of them. And you've brought them over the net, and you got, oh my God, how in the world did they get here? Well, I find in the bulk of cases, you're the one who brought them over. You're the one who carried them there. And you did it for really good intentions. I want to make sure they know more about what we're doing. I want to do these things. But then you didn't bring them back right away and take them back over the net. Thank them for their help. And then the board member wants to stay there on that point in time. And I find if you don't early on in your career put that marker down, it becomes a habit and something they want to do regularly. And you have to be careful as well, though, that you live up to your part with the board in that you give them what they need to operate. I worked with one particular superintendent, and he sort of treated the board like mushrooms. Do you know where mushrooms grow the best? They grow in the dark, and you feed them a lot of manure to fertilize them. And if that's the way you're going to treat your board, you're going to find that you have a rough time. But if you hold yourself accountable, if you do those pieces, you truly work with the board on the vision and mission in those components, great things can happen for you. And with the vision and mission being pieces that the board gets to decide, I find as well, though, in that interview process for staff members, I want to know what each individual that I'm hiring or working with, what is their personal vision and mission? Are we in alignment? So from their beliefs to their personal vision and mission. And I was looking at people who had a personal vision and mission that included moments of targeted outrage. They found it absolutely outrageous that we had groups of children who couldn't be successful. And they were angry about it. There's a great scene in a movie called Network. I don't know if some of you aren't old enough to remember that movie, but from the early 70s, there's a scene in the movie Network where they open up the window and they scream. Does anyone remember what they scream out the window? I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm looking for people on a team whose personal vision and mission is that they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. And they're going to do something about it. I found those folks, the districts I go to where I see that, they are aligned in beliefs, vision, and mission. But it doesn't just stop there, because those things don't always convert into actions. For example, I've seen districts, I've been to districts, I've been to a board meeting in the last 2 weeks where not everyone on the board is willing to stand up and scream. It's a wealthy district, but 10% of the kids there are doing very poorly. But that's okay. It's those kids, is the way some people act. But when is someone going to stand up and scream? And they have this crazy number. Over 70% of the kids in that district have a personal tutor. Now think of that kind of support. Parents are, so it's okay. And there's a lot of the parents that 10%, well, guess they should have gotten a personal tutor. In that district, there's a few board members who stood up and said, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore, and we're going to do something about that. When you get the aggregation of individuals that do that, things start to move forward, but you've got to turn it into action. And I think it turns into action with the theory of action. So what is your compelling story, but then start it into action and activities to move ahead? And I like to think of this as the theory of action sort of resides right on top of that tennis net. The board works on it, the staff works on it. If you come up with the right theory of action, the board creates a strategic plan, which we'll talk about in a minute, to put it in place. And the board sets goals. The board sets expectations based on that theory of action that puts it into work on a daily basis. So that theory of action, I want to see people's individual theories of action and the group's theory of action. So it's a storyline. It's a vision. It makes it concrete. And it gives you a narrative. This is what we are going to do. And making that narrative a reality, well, they have that district-wide milestones, but the theory of action creates that strategy development. And let me give you an example. So if the central office does X, so if we at the central office do X, then principals can do Y, which helps teachers to do Z, which helps all students learn. So what are you doing to have that alignment? So let's take it a step further. In Charlotte, with the work we did, and they ended up writing a book about the work, we had a theory of action that had 4 components. We said it's going to start with great leaders. So we are going to align all of our work, first of all, around great leaders. And I got to tell you, we offended some people with that. We offended some of our teachers. And then when I got to talk to them a little more, they came on board. And here's how. You know what I found over time? Do you know where great teachers accumulate? At schools with great principals. Do you know where ineffective teachers accumulate? At schools with ineffective principals. And I found that your highly effective teachers like to hang around with other highly effective teachers. And they don't like having at their school ineffective teachers. And if they could feel there was a way without reprisal for them to stand up, open up the window and scream out it, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, they want the ineffective teachers gone from their schools too. So I believe that we've got to start, though, with the great principles. And guess where I found that great principles accumulate? In districts with district office leadership that supports them, that gives them opportunities for advancement, that feeds them in their work. So great principles accumulate in districts that supervise and support their principals in a way that helps them grow and lead to do the things that they want. And those district offices that do that, I find that those are in districts with a cabinet or the most senior level leadership team that feeds those needs for them. And do you know where I found those cabinets or senior leadership teams exist? In districts where superintendents are aligned with their work and bring those pieces together, and where superintendents are willing to jump over that net and bring the board over sometimes, but it's in districts with superintendents who are phenomenally good at taking people back across the net when they need to go back across it. And I see this time after time in the districts that increase student achievement at scale. It starts with the great leaders. Then it's about the great teachers. It's about the effective teachers. And when I think of an effective teacher, I'm thinking about one that has the biggest bag of tricks and a phenomenal flashlight to pull the right trick out of the bag. And what I'm finding as I get older, now I'm in my mid-50s, I'm not putting as many tricks in my bag anymore as I did earlier in my career. But I cannot believe how much better and how much brighter my flashlight now is. I'm getting so much better at pulling out the right tool to use. And I work with a superintendent who has a really big toolbox. She has every size hammer that has ever been created in that toolbox. But the effective people have a bunch of different size hammers, but they've also got some lubricant. And they've got some fine grit sandpaper just to take off a tough edge. And they know when to pull out the right tool. And those teachers are the same way. I'll never forget my daughter's first day at school. On her first day at school, my first day as a superintendent in her district, at that point in time, the district we were in, she was running across the playground because she saw me coming out. And as she was running across the playground, she fell down and scratched her knee. She scraped her knee. That teacher went up to our daughter, and even on the first day, had built a relationship already with our daughter that was able to give her a hug, stop her from crying. That's the same teacher who pushed her in mathematics to do things that were never imaginable in our minds. They can hug them, they can give them a kick in the pants when appropriate. They've got those tools. That was the second part of our theory of action. The third part, accountability, using data to manage, performance management. I'm thinking of accountability a lot differently than many might be thinking about this. So I'm in the process of writing a book. And by the way, I've been saying that line now for about 5 years. I'm in the process of writing a book. But it's real. It's got to be done by January 1st. And in it, we talk about the beliefs. I talk about the beliefs I have about accountability. I believe accountability is transparency, support, and pressure. I believe coaching is part of an accountability model. I believe giving them the resources they need is part of an accountability model. And if we just think of accountability as a toolbox full of every size hammer, we're not meeting those needs. And the graphic we use to show this is a circle, and it's got 3 sections on the circle: transparency, support, and pressure. And I like to think of it, that circle's like a tire. What happens to a tire if it's out of balance? What is the ride like? If that tire is out of balance, if the accountability system is all pressure, or if it's just all support, or if it's just all transparency, the ride gets bumpy. In the districts I have seen where the superintendents are getting it done, their theory of action somewhere in there includes accountability, but not accountability through the traditional lens. It's transparency, support, and pressure. And the fourth part of our theory of action was differentiated resources. You've got third graders who can read Tolstoy and third graders who are just learning book handling skills. So they're going to need some different things. So for a while, we lived in a home where one of our neighbors, the young man, was a beautiful boy, but he was struggling greatly, and he was on the autism scale. And I'm out getting our newspaper one morning, and as I'm out getting the newspaper, his mom calls me over, so I go over, and she just said, I want to let you know, my son has the best teachers ever this year. I thought, that's fantastic, thank you. So I went in the house after getting the newspaper, I told my wife that story, and she said, Pete, I've been meaning to tell you, I don't think Katie's got as good of teachers as she's had in the past. Katie's our daughter. And you see, Robert was an area superintendent in Charlotte. And Robert, what was the most requested class we ever had in Charlotte? Wherever Gorman's kid was. Because people were pretty confident that that superintendent was going to give my kid the finest teachers possible. So after my wife told me that story of, I don't think Katie has as strong a teachers this year, I called that principal. And I said, hey, what's going on? And he said, do you remember when you said do whatever we need to do to differentiate resources to get kids where they need to be? Your neighbor's kid has Katie's teachers normally. And Katie's got his teachers normally. We flipped it. And do you know at the end of the year, my daughter did just fine? And any gaps that needed to be filled, my wife and I filled those gaps. But also at the end of the year, that principal told me, remarkable since we've redone the schedule in that way, I'm now starting to hear about some teachers that I never heard about who were struggling. But they were with those kids whose parents weren't engaged or involved, and no one ever said a word about it. He said, oh my God, we're now drilling down on those issues. We're trying to help them get better, and there's some we're coaching to find another career where they can help children in other ways, but to not be a teacher. We used to differentiate resources. We used something called weighted student staffing and weighted student funding, where in middle schools we ranged from, we had a school that we funded at $4,200 per student, and another school we funded at $12,000 per student. By the way, we didn't brag about it or talk about it a lot in the community. I could have won a lot of points in some of our communities by telling people we were doing that, but I know the moment I did that, we'd end up having to stop doing it because our board would get so much pressure from the community that was at 4,200, it would take us down. So I used to regularly get the crap kicked out of me. You don't do enough for our kids, you're not doing these things. But it was the right thing to do to take that beating to protect others. And that's what we need to do for all kids. But this is part of an aligned system. This is part of it. And that aligns with the vision, mission, and the beliefs of people. But this starts to put it in action. And with that, at the bottom it says equity focus. So about 2/3 of our kids in elementaries and middles were in about 1/3 of our schools. So we had to tackle it at those schools. We had to get our most effective staff there. Funny, when you became a principal in some of the districts I've worked with, some of the districts I've worked in, your port of entry to the principalship was through a highly impoverished school. And then after you learn things and you get pretty good at being a principal, we shipped you out to the suburbs to a high-performing school. And you could retire out there. You could die out there. And we had this constant churn. And we said, wait a minute, if we're going to differentiate our resources and we're going to do it from an equity focus, we decided to redefine resources as people, time, and money. Your most effective staff in the greatest dosage with the tools and materials they need. But first of all, it's about the most effective people. And I'll never forget, I got to serve on this board for a group that did an after-school program. Not as good as a program we're going to talk to you about later today. And this program, the board chair was a guy named Larry Summers, who'd been president of Harvard. He was President Obama's chief economic advisor. And he was saying at one of our meetings, I was having breakfast with him, and Larry said, if you offer me A+ people and B+ strategy, or if you offer me A+ strategy and B+ people, I'll take A people and B strategy any day. He said, oh, no, wait a minute. I'll take A people and F strategy over A strategy and B people because F strategy doesn't survive A people. And then oddly, just a weird juxtaposition, later that week I was reading a Wall Street Journal book review, and it was Donald Rumsfeld book that was coming out, and he used the phrase, A's hire A's, B's hire C's and D's. First of all, I thought it was pretty interesting that Larry Summers on one end of the political spectrum and Donald Rumsfeld both informed my view of leadership. But I do believe that B's hire C's and D's. And in an aligned system, you're getting your A's with the kids who need it the most. And you're working on the B's and C's, but as a first step, you're finding ways to get your A's out there with those kids. Because this is what we think all kids deserve. And in most cases, unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with. So we've got to do something to change that. And we sometimes do it because we say we're going to do it equality, we're going to give them more. But I don't care if you get a box to stand on. If it's still not enough for you to see over the fence, you don't get to enjoy what's going on. Now with that, we came up with an activity on theory of action, and you're going to do this activity a little later this morning. You're going to do this activity, and we took a tool, I found this, it was like Mad Libs, but Ed Libs, and we worked on that where we came up with our elevator pitch, what was our theory of action? And we came up with one that was pretty simple. We knew what we stood for. We were about raising the bar for all kids, closing achievement gaps, and increasing graduation rates. And to do that, we our theory of action, and we were going to use it in ways that we could define, measure, and support effectiveness of educators. We could get the most effective people in the jobs we needed them to do. We had 7 goals in our plan, and there was our outcome. When we were able to know that everyone believed that, we were, oops. I'm losing it? All right. Thank you. All righty. When we were able to be aligned and everyone believed that and we were all moving in that direction, we started to all get in the same boat. But until that point in time, we were paddling around in different boats. Then we ended up aligning our policies. This was a painful one. And I'm not going to go through this piece, but when in 08 and 09, when we hit the tough budget times, we laid off based on effectiveness instead of seniority. North Carolina is a right-to-work state. We were able to do that. 115 districts, 114 laid off based on seniority. Well, if we would have done it based on seniority, we wouldn't have been in alignment. And I actually used that alignment with our board. And you know what? At times, I used the board's theory of action against them. Board, in alignment with our vision, mission, core beliefs, and commitments in our theory of action, today I bring to you our proposed format for how we're going to approach the layoffs. And board, I know it would be a lot easier just to do it by last in, first out. But that doesn't benefit kids. And if we believe in our vision and mission, we must put it in action, and this is the way to do it. Now, let me tell you, it was horrible, the process. It was horrible, but it was the right thing to do. And we're in a delayed gratification business. Some of you taught a kid in elementary school, and then you find out that, knucklehead Johnny goes on to be a doctor, and you find it out years later. Well, we did this in 08 and 09, and in 2015, the Journal for Policy, Education, and Research did a study that showed one district in North Carolina came out of the budget reduction process and was more effective and increased student achievement at a higher rate than any other district. So I point that out to say, if you're just willing to wait 7 years after you do the work to get gratification and proven it was right, it'll all pay off. But we got to set that tone from the superintendency that we're willing to do that. And in the best districts I've worked with, I see this over and over, that the superintendent's willing to put down that marker. Now, if you're coming new to a district, your entry plan's got to be in alignment. Then you write that strategic plan. I've seen it over and over again with the districts that I work with. Their plan is aligned to their work. Not only is the plan aligned to their work, their organizational structure is aligned to that work. And they go back to the board and say, look, I know Dr. Smith, who's running this division, is beloved, but they're not having an impact. They're not aligned to that work. We can't continue to have them in that role. One of my favorites was I worked with a district that used to have required PD that the district office had for everyone, and they instead gave the schools money and let them buy the PD from the district. And they looked at the end of the year to see if the PD providers within the district, had they earned funds equivalent to have them in the role. There was a required PD that no one bought. But they had done it forever and ever because Margie's a lovely lady. Margie's wonderful. She didn't do anything to help you increase student achievement, but gosh, you like being with her. And those alignment pieces need to be there with your team. It's got to be fit for your group. And one of my other favorites was the budget. I first saw this in Houston. Houston Public Schools took their budget and they took every item in their budget, and after the item in the budget, they listed what strategic plan item it's linked to. Powerful piece to do. When we rolled this out in Charlotte, at the end of 1 year, we had an item on there. We wanted to provide world-class service because we didn't do that. As a matter of fact, we used these secret shoppers in this one thing. We found if you were an African-American parent, you waited twice as long as a white parent for someone to come and help you at an office. Think about that. What a terrible way to treat individuals. But we found we weren't making as much progress in this area. We went through the budget and looked at, we're not spending any damn money to fix it. We had no items to fix it. We assessed it. We took the temperature. We didn't figure out how to fix the fever. Then we started to do that. We started to move the ball. But the districts where I see this alignment, their budget is aligned. And their accountability system that I touched on earlier, they are in alignment. Transparency, support, and pressure. Over and over, I see it. Things like letting the public know performance. By the way, this is not about giving school grades. I've never seen someone get better because you embarrassed them by calling them an F. And by the way, I don't know why you can't get highly engaged, involved parents send their kids to your F-rated school. I just don't get it. We're going to help you get better by calling you an F. Look, there are other ways to inform folks about performance. And then the final piece of it is the evaluation. And with that evaluation, we found in a district I recently worked with, 99.8% of its teachers were rated as distinguished or highly effective. So I said to the superintendent, how many classrooms at any one of the schools would you let them blindly schedule your kid if your kid went to that school? 99.8% of the classrooms? They said no. So as we talked about that a little more, and in Charlotte, it was great that we had a top-notch chief of staff. Robert, who used to prepare that document? It was him. Because we all worked together to make sure everyone's evaluations were aligned. Because in that district that 99.8% of the teachers are effective, highly effective, 100% of the principals, the superintendent's on the ropes with the board. So wait a minute. Apparently you're the one screwing everything up? because everyone else is highly effective? And you see, I used to use this phrase when I talk to folks, that if you don't tell the truth to adults, you might be lying to children, and we're not going to lie to kids. We are not going to lie to kids. And when you as a principal get up there and you say at a PTA day, a PTA night with parents, this is the best staff I've ever worked for, I would put my child in any one of those classrooms. You're lying to them possibly if you've not put in action things to help individuals. And by the way, if you've got the accountability system right, that person that's not as effective, you're providing them the support along with the pressure that they're getting better, or you're moving them out. So at the end in Charlotte, we started to move the ball. They even go on to say nice things. I didn't think they had to say love them or hate them. But you know what's funny? The bottom two bullets, they said it when I was leaving. I never read that stuff in the paper while I was there. Instead, they were just drawing cartoons of the guys with the big nose. So along with you needing to put in place that aligned system, you have to be sort of self-renewing because no one else is going to do it. But where can you go and get that renewal? That's why moments like this are important. Being in a room with people who are living the job you're living. You've got to find those opportunities because they don't come from other places. In most communities, there's a county manager and a city manager who are the only other people that work for a public board like you do. And unfortunately, due to competing political forces, and many times you have to be at war with those folks. So wait a minute, the only people that understand your job and have a similar environment you have to be at war with, which gives you nobody. Which is why you've got to come to things like this. You've got to find those opportunities. I used to go to breakfast regularly with a group of other superintendents. I just needed it. Because all day long, people came to work with a ladle, and they took a scoop out of the bucket, and they took a scoop out of the bucket, and a scoop out of the bucket. I had to refill the bucket. And in the districts that are doing the best work in an aligned systems, that leader is driving those points home, and they're filling the bucket for themselves to make sure they've got what they need. All righty, so thank you for your attention. Let me tell you what we're going to do right now. There's two particular series of activities you're going to do today. The first is you're going to have a series of presentations for you by our partners, and they're going to share some information with you. And when those presentations end, you are going to have a moment to go with a stand-up partner. This is someone you're going to make a very deep and meaningful relationship over the next 30 seconds in a minute. And after each session, you are going to come together and you're going to talk about what you just heard, and the presenters are going to give you a challenge. They're going to say, I would like you to talk about, or I would like you to think about, and you're going to go with your stand-up partner and do that. So that's one of the activities you're going to do today, is you're going to have these presentations, stand-up partners. Then later in the afternoon, you're going to have roundtables. These are incredibly important for you to have the ability to shape products and services by giving unfettered feedback. If you don't tell them the truth, you might be lying to kids. Because they're going to be out there selling products and services that aren't going to be as good as they could be. You've got to tell these folks the truth in the roundtables. It is imperative you do that. We need you to help with that. All right, so you've got a card on your desk. Find your card, please. Hold your card up. I now want you to find a person with the same number card as you. A jack, a queen,